So I am Frida Mannerfelt, a practical theologian from Lund University with a special interest in the practice of preaching in digital culture and spaces. And I had the honor of writing chapter 17 on online preaching. So, as several other presenters this year has pointed out, the same thing that makes digital theology such an exciting field, the fact that it's constantly changing at a very fast pace, is also the thing that makes digital theology, let's say, challenging. That move that Sabrina Mille and Aline Knapp described in their presentation on practical theology and digitality the other day, uh, that from a trickle here and there before COVID-19 to a sudden flood of research during the pandemic, and how that flood now has sort of sunken into the ground and become part of a broader understanding of the field, has of course affected the practical theological subdiscipline on preaching as well. And my chapter on online preaching was written around here in 2022 at a time when we still had our rubber boots on, and our new friend AI had not already been broadly incorporated in the practice of preaching or scholarly discussion yet. As frustrating as that is, as we have discussed throughout the conference, there is a massive presence of AI in public and scholarly discourse. And while this is sort of fascinating and exciting, the fascination of AI sometimes obscure that there are still interesting things going on with other kinds of digital media. For example, there's an interesting phenomenon called online preaching that I'm going to talk about now. So, in my chapter, I wanted to do two things. The first was to give an overview of how scholars have approached the topic of online preaching. If I were to present this as sort of a field of its own, what would that look like? Many of us who are interested in online preaching come to the field as practical theologians who are specialized in homiletics, and that is mirrored in the approaches as well as my presentation, of course. You can see clear connections in how homileticians usually approach preaching in general, in how online preaching is approached. But of course, this is digital theology, so scholars come from a wide range of fields to do research on online preaching. We have digital religion, all the social and behavior sciences, biblical scholars, systematic theologians, ethicists, computer science. It's all over the place. So moving on to the approaches to online preaching, I'm going to present four with a question mark. And of course, this is to be seen as sort of a heuristic tool here to help us see things. But when we look at the research, of course, these kind of approaches mingle, they are entangled into each other. So the first approach was the message-oriented approaches family. They center on how digital media serves as a tool, just like any other media in the history of the church, to enable preachers to do what they always have done. There might be a few differences and challenges due to the media in question, but all in all, homiletics is homiletics no matter what medium. This approach is sometimes associated with evangelicals and Pentecostals, since they are generally fast adapters of new media and also focused on mission and outreach. But during the pandemics, you could see this approach across denominations. Here is a quote to get a sense of what it might sound like. The reasons we preach and the components that constitute the sermon are unaffected by the medium. The Word of God is transmitted just as efficaciously, whether told as a story in ancient times, read silently in a Bible 100 years ago, or listen to in a podcast today. Part of the discussion on digital tools is, of course, how they can be used in education of preachers and in sermon preparation. So I wanted to just include, even if this is something that, of course, is part of online preaching and all preaching in general, this question of digital tools, I wanted to include just something about it in the chapter, so I did. Um, Digital tools in education and sermon preparation. And I also included one of the lists. Homileticians love to write lists on pros and cons, and there are quite a few on the topic digital tools in sermon preparation. And I hope that this section in the handbook might serve as a reminder that problems in sermon preparation, such as uh, dependence on digital tools instead of your own skills, deception, that preachers could be tempted to cut and paste, or degradation, that they might get lazy, or division, or despising, as in tech users despise non-tech users and vice versa, did not originate with AI chats. It's been a question that's been alive for a long time. And also that AI is not the first technology to be framed as something that will promote things like affordability, accessibility, efficiency, and linguistic ability. I also wanted to show you a few examples of recent research that look into AI digital tools. And if I were to write the chapter today, I would, of course, have expanded this section a little more and included these kinds of questions. And the second approach to online preaching, we have media-oriented approaches. They draw on communication media theories to answer questions such as what kind of communication is going on in online preaching, and how is the practice of preaching in general affected by the media involved in the communication. And these are questions that homileticians have asked since at least the 1950s or 1960s, and you can see a continuity in theoretical resources too. Dialogue, still a favorite concept, and it's no coincidence, I think, that, for example, Valdeon's theory of orality and literacy and the subsequent age of electronics interpreted as digital culture, which inspired, for example, David Buttrick's widely influential oral phenomenological homiletics in the 1980s, is still popular among homileticians that are interested in online preaching. On approaches to online preaching in this category sometimes also takes an interest in how digital media and these ways of communication challenges general homiletical truths, such as what might be considered a sermon. Could a message on WhatsApp, an Instagram post, a podcast, or tweet be considered preaching? If so, what does it mean for the practice of preaching in general? And who might be a preacher? Also, this is also commonly interpreted as fostering preaching that is dialogical, practice-oriented, focused on storytelling and the everyday life of a Christian. The third approach that I introduced here is the ontology-oriented approaches. They focus on question of real and virtual and authenticity in preaching. Commonly, they start with the doctrine of incarnation to contrast real human bodies to virtual bodies, where the former is usually understood as essential to preaching. In those cases, the conclusion is that online preaching should be avoided or perhaps serve as a supplement. Here's an example of how that might sound from a special issue on religions on just online preaching. The implication of the incarnation surely is that the community in question should be real, substantive, and personal rather than merely virtual. To state the matter in a more ironic fashion, whereas our communion with the Savior may be to all appearances virtual, he is, after all, no longer visible among us. Our communion with one another is normatively in the flesh. Christian community is best lived face to face with real people rather than virtually or at a distance. In turn, communication and reception of the Christian gospel seem likewise best suited to flesh and blood presence on the part of the believers. Whether or not that applies to other kinds of mediated preaching, such as printed sermons, sermon collections, are rarely discussed. However, there are, of course, homileticians who have a different view of the relationship between real and virtual, talk about it as a continuation of the real, and preaching as something that is, well, always mediated in some capacity, which has implications for the practice of preaching. And here I would like to quote Ilona Nord. In the world of faith, it is not just that which we can actually see before us that is valid, but it's often more important is something which is quite literally virtual, i.e., that which is available to us because there exists a possibility that it exists. Which is, of course, as we heard in the lecture just before this presentation, the narratives about what is possible is, of course, central also to the practice of preaching. I concluded that section with pointing to a growing fourth approach, more practice-oriented approach that draws on lived theology, socio-material approaches of various kinds, practice theory, and again, that is sort of aligning with a broader development where practical theologians and also homileticians use these kinds of approaches to understand other things too, not just online preaching. So, where would we go from here? Giving an overview was the first goal, and the other was to point to four key topics that I think could be interesting to explore or that we need to explore. And I'm also happy to see that brilliant work is being done. First key topic is authority. It's been a key question in homiletics since the end of the 19th century, at least since the 1970s, and in homiletics, but also in digital religion, of course. And it's a key question, I think, in online preaching too. What kind of authority is at play in online preaching? And what about, for example, algorithmic authority? And is there a democratization of preaching, or does it support existing hierarchies? This is, of course, the question of authority, a pressing question for AI and preaching as well, along with its adjacent questions of agency and authenticity. Next key topic is typologies. Online preaching can be many things, depending what kind of digital media that are involved or how the online preaching relates to the on-site preaching. However, there is a lack of established concepts to talk about that variety, or at least it was when I was out there in my rubber boots writing the chapter. Now, interestingly, we can see chapters such as, or articles such as the one that I listed here from the latest issue of Homiletic that in a very it just puts it out there, online, hybrid, and in-person homiletical formation. Next key issue is the listeners. There is a sore need for more studies on reception and the listener's experience of online preaching. I find this lack a bit surprising since the field of homiletics have been obsessed with describing and theorizing the listener's experience of the preaching event for quite a long time, but we are still lacking interesting resources in this particular topic. There are interesting things, of course, done. I wanted to give an example of one interesting study on online preachers in Central Asian countries. This is a study of Islamic online preaching in Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan, and what these preachers are saying, and also how their audience react to it. So it's a very interesting article in that sense, but it's also interesting because it draws the attention to something else that I think I would have liked to discuss if I were to write this chapter today, the relation between online preaching and political endeavors. Because if you can say that people preach in social media, uh, as and laypersons can preach, for example, influencers, is it preaching when a far-right politician or influencer write about church, Christianity, issues of faith on their social media? And finally, the fourth topic is theologies of online preaching. I would love to see more sturdy work on theologies of online preaching and general theologies of preaching that is informed by online preaching. Um, just to point to an example that is recently published, Casey Thornberry Sigmund's Engaging the Gadfly, reflecting online hybrid and in-person preaching in a digital age. Good work is being done, but much more remains to be done in that department. So, quick overview of the chapter.